A glimmer of hope after years of war in Yemen. If prisoner exchanges signal a first step toward peace, could there finally be an end in sight to almost a decade of fighting? And if not, how much more suffering can Yemeni civilians take? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is the war in Yemen. What started as a conflict between Yemeni factions in 2014 soon turned into a full-blown war, fought in large part via proxy between Iran and a Saudi-led coalition. But almost a decade later, thanks to a recent rapprochement between Riyadh and Tehran, it's hoped Yemen will see an end to hostilities. On Monday, 104 Saudi-held Houthi detainees were released, and that followed a three-day operation by the International Committee of the Red Cross that oversaw the return of nearly 900 prisoners. Further talks between the Houthis and Saudi are set to continue after the Eid holiday, and with Yemenis experiencing one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet, the need to end the conflict is more crucial than ever.
The war in Yemen led to one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern times. But after 9 years, an end might be near. The Yemeni government and Houthis have freed hundreds of prisoners as part of a three-day exchange. The deal, coordinated by the International Committee of the Red Cross, involved high-level prisoners from both sides, including a former defense minister and brother of the former president Abdrabbu Mansur Hadi. In hugs and tears of joy, they were finally reunited with their loved ones. In a major breakthrough for the families and Yemeni politics, nearly 900 prisoners were released as part of an agreement reached in Switzerland last month.
We are sure that this is a good boost for better days for Yemen. And we are also confident that the success of this release operation will bring more chances for more release in the future.
On Monday, Saudi Arabia also freed 104 prisoners. It's the biggest swap since October 2020 and follows diplomatic efforts to ease the suffering and bring truce to Yemen. But the UN says there's still more work to be done.
Let us be under no illusions. There is a lot of hard work to be done to build trust and to make compromise. Yemenis need to come together under United Nations auspices to agree on how to end this long and terrible war. There is even more work to be done to recover, rebuild, and reach a sustainable, just, and equitable peace. Mediation efforts will always adapt and evolve, but the parties must not allow this moment to pass without coming to an agreement.
The conflict is widely seen as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, but hopes were raised last month when the two regional rivals agreed to end their 7-year diplomatic rift. Earlier this month, a Saudi delegation arrived Sana'a for talks with the Houthi rebels. And in a moment of relief for millions of Yemenis, the Saudi Arabian-led military coalition lifted restrictions on imports headed for Yemen's southern ports.
The humanitarian file is the priority with all its details. That is to say, the unconditional reopening of airports and seaports, the payment of salaries, and oil revenues in general, which should return to the Yemeni people, whether in the form of salaries or basic services.
Yemen's conflict has left more than 150,000 people dead and more than 23 million people, 3/4 of the population, in need of some form of aid. But perhaps, more than anything, Yemenis need lasting peace.
So, will Yemen see lasting peace anywhere in the near future? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Sana'a, Houthi journalist Hussain Albukhaiti. From here in Istanbul, Najeeb Ghanem, a Yemeni member of parliament with the Saudi-supported Islah Party. And from Vienna, Ibrahim Jalal is a Yemeni conflict and defense researcher and non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. Thanks all so much for being with us. Ibrahim, let's begin with this prisoner swap, almost 1,000 people in total released. So exchanges like this are meant to serve as trust-building mechanisms. How important is that in the case of Yemen's conflict, and how far could it go towards stopping the actual fighting?
Thanks for having me. I think this is a significant step in confidence building, but most importantly for almost 1,000 family who has lost one of their relatives, and from across the political spectrum. You had Houthi prisoners, you had journalists, you had prisoners from both the government in Saudi Arabia, and of course house arrested, forcibly disappeared. So this brings relief for many families, but also helps build trust among the different conflict actors at this point, government, non-government, and that's significant. The timing is as we've seen in the past, is tied now towards the new de-escalation roadmap proposed by the Saudis and supported with the Omani mediation. And I think that timing helps connect the dots if it's intended to develop trust within that framework.
So you have the two elements here, the prisoner swap and the de-escalation roadmap. Hussain, let me ask you, first, has seeing the prisoner swap, it was very emotional in many cases, plus the rapprochement, the de-escalation roadmap, and the progression of talks that we've witnessed now, has it built confidence in your mind?
I think it has, especially this prisoner swaps. We know that there are about 15 to 16,000 prisoners in the hand of all parties, and their families has been suffering for some of them for 8 years, and that's why I think this latest visit of the Saudi ambassador to Sana'a, and as well directly the prisoner swap without any delay or any obstruction, it was a good sign that all parties in Yemen might be willing finally for peace. But let me make it clear that me personally, I believe that the Saudi visit to Sana'a, it came because they knew there was an imminent attack planned against Saudi Arabia, because the truce has been signed a year ago, and since then Saudi actually has not fulfilled their offers that they will lift the blockade and as well reopen Sana'a airport and pay the salaries of Yemeni public sector from gas and oil revenue that's actually in the hand of the Saudi Arabia or their backed forces in Marib. That's why I think that that visit, I believe it came just to delay or to avoid any attack, because if the Saudi will met those three demands, they can guarantee, and those are actually a humanitarian demand. They are not in the favor of the Houthi or of the government of Sana'a. If they fulfill those three demands, then they can actually guarantee there will be no attack against Saudi Arabia. But after that, as Muhammad Abd Salam, the spokesperson of Ansarullah, have said that the Saudi actually should withdraw all its troops from Yemen, should stop supporting any groups or militia in Yemen. And as well, we're going to see that United Arab Emirates actually, it might be excluded from any agreement with Saudi Arabia.
Okay, before you go too far, I do want to look at those other angles, especially the role of the UAE in here. But let me get Najeeb's perspective first. I mean, do you agree with anything Hussain has had to say, especially that this was done to preemptively prevent an attack on Saudi?
Really, no, I'm not agree with him, because always Houthis always claiming that they would like to ask more money to gain. But just would like to remind him and remind Houthis that they put their hands on public money, taxes, and all public refunds. I mean, they just put it on them and stop even giving to the public sector any money. So they just use these money to feed the war. Based on historical background of Houthis, really, they didn't give us this. I mean, the impression that they will fulfill all demands or all requirements for any treatment or any agreement. So to be honest, we are not that optimistic. Although really we are very keen to see our country peace and to stop war and restoring sustainable peace. But the chronic problem is with Houthis, with this historical backgrounds, bad records on admitting fulfillment of any agreement.
Okay. I mean, but Najeeb, so you say you're not optimistic simply because you don't trust the Houthis.
This is one, yeah. This is one point. The other one, we have to differentiate between stop war and guarantee sustainable peace in Yemen. Sustainable peace in Yemen should, make sure that Houthis will put their hands out of the heavy machinery stolen by the public sector, and also just give out these 8,000 prisoners under the prisons. All are civilians, while the prisoners in the allied countries, Saudi Arabia and other also free areas in Yemen, all are military soldiers belong to Houthis. So even we have two types of prisoners. Those who are captured by Houthis, most of them are civilians, captured them from their houses, while those in the other camp, they are soldiers. So the story and the secret word that we should look for Iran, if Iran has real willingness to stop war in Yemen, they should put their hands out of supporting Houthis, and Houthis should admit to all requirements in favor of our Yemen, people in Yemen. Otherwise, 8 years is really very agony.
Let me go back to Ibrahim quickly, just to get some clarity, if possible. I mean, we're hearing two diametrically opposed opinions, really, of who's at fault, let's put it that way, for this war in general. Now, obviously, warring parties will have a complete lack of trust between where each side stands. But do you think now that the people involved specifically in these negotiations and talks can at least get past these major obstacles of distrust to help move a peace process forward? Because let's be honest, this war cannot continue indefinitely, given that this is one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet, and it was already the poorest country in the region.
Yes, war cannot continue indefinitely, and it shouldn't. But it must be clearly understood that the current efforts are framed within, they propose it as a peace framework, but it really is more a de-escalation map. And it's a de-escalation map because, as one of your guests clearly noted, that there's a clear disconnect between this de-escalation or measures, as well as a sustainable peace framework that's based on mutual concessions, proved level of trust, but also delivering some of the commitments made. And I think the mistrust that we see today are barely results of previous peace processes, but also de-escalation measures, including truces in the past. We saw the past truce, and we spoke about this almost a year ago, when we had I think the first truce, and I told you then what after the truce is most important, and it was important because it was not tied to a clear political process, and it eventually collapsed 6 months later because of the increasing level of demands, particularly on the Houthi part, as Hussain noted, and today we clearly see Saudi will to extricate themselves from the conflict, and that's only the regional layer. And over the past 8 years has widened in terms of grievances, has multi-layered faces, and I think these have to be addressed. And for them to be done so, you would have a politically negotiated manner that's inclusive within Yemenis, for Yemen, and above all, it's going to be a lengthy process. Issues of the shape of the political system, the type of the social contract, distribution of power and resources, as well as transitional justice, among others, security and military arrangements, are going all to take a long time.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit more detail about that in just a second, about, if in the future, if there is a settlement, who would get what would be acceptable, what shape it could actually take. But Hussain, let me come back to you, because you had alluded to the fact that we're hearing a lot about what Saudi wants to do, but the other major player involved is the United Arab Emirates. You seem to feel they're acting independently, in a sense, of Saudi, even though it is part of the so-called Saudi-led coalition. They still have their own air bases, as you've pointed out, not least on Socotra Island. What are your real concerns with the fact that the United Arab Emirates is still what you see as an independent player, in a sense, in this conflict?
We have seen that United Arab Emirates has built an airport, an army base in Mocha Port, and as well in Mune Island, which is in the Bab al Mandab Strait, and as well in Abdul Khori Island, which is near Socotra, in Socotra itself, in Shabwa. I mean that they are actually doing that. They are doing bases for the future, and this is actually directly with the involvement of the United Kingdom and as well the Zionist state of Israel, because they want to have some present in this key area in Yemen. And of course that Saudi, they are leading the so-called coalition against Yemen. If they can guarantee that United Arab Emirates will actually withdraw all its forces, this means that United Arab Emirates and as well Saudi Arabia will avoid any attack. But if the Saudi cannot guarantee United Arab Emirates to do so, they should guarantee that the Saudi themselves will withdraw from Yemen, will stop supporting any of these militia or groups in Yemen, and then Yemenis actually and Yemeni missile unit will take all its focus against United Arab Emirates. Let me just add one more thing. There are some indirect messages coming, especially from Dubai towards Sana'a, because they are not involved in this war. They don't want any attack on Dubai, because the whole blame actually is towards Mohammed bin Zayed and as well Abu Dhabi. They are the one actually who is actually in this war. And United Arab Emirates actually they in their favor when Yemen attacks Saudi Arabia, because they know that Mohammed bin Salman and the vision of 2030, it actually will affect United Arab Emirates, will affect their economy, because if we see that Saudi Arabia will reopen their economy as it is now in United Arab Emirates, I'm sure that many companies will take its businesses to Saudi Arabia. That's why United Arab Emirates actually would rather if we continue to attack Saudi Arabia. But they totally forgot that the main reason for their existence in Yemen is to occupy and divide Yemen, and Sana'a.
Let me ask Najeeb about that. I mean, is it at least a fair ask for the Houthis to say that the United Arab Emirates needs to get their air bases, their military installments, out of Yemen as well? How fundamental would that be to peace? How acceptable would it be to the government as well in negotiations going forward?
Yeah, okay, I can answer it. But before that, you can just see, I mean, the language of Houthis, and and Hussein is speaking behalf of Houthis, and always intimidation that they are ready for war. And Muhammad Abdul Salam said, if Saudis will not admit and fulfill all demands they ask, and they are just asking more money, refinery and oil money, just to add their wealth against our people. I mean, so this is the language they are speaking. They said, we are ready for war. So when they are always believing for these divine rights of rule, so how can you imagine, how could we, sign an agreement with those people who are speaking that they are supreme people, and they by Allah, by their God, they have to rule people, and they have the right to capture public money and to stop giving salaries to the people. And on the top of that, he's asking more money from the oil refinery and oil, wealth. So really, those are really unrealistic people. So the peace is still far from what you've seen, I mean, in this agenda.
And that's so disappointing to hear, Najeeb. But I mean, having said that, we know that agreements are being signed and that negotiations are going forward. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said before, we have to shade between those truces and also, stop war between two brackets, but to guarantee sustainable peace, we're still far beyond guaranteeing sustainable peace, while Houthis still in this, idea, this dogma, this faith that they have the right.
Najeeb, I have to ask you this then. You're also a former health minister for Yemen. Unfortunately, it looks like we've lost Najeeb. I was going to ask Ibrahim, I mean, how much more can really be sustained here as far as the humanitarian crisis is concerned? You've got some 75% of the population now dependent on aid.
Yeah, I think, the stakes in Yemen are high, as you rightly pointed. There is a dire humanitarian crisis that's expanding. There is a large sector of the public sector, particularly in the northwest, that are not paid for over 5 years. There are resources that are not being tapped on and used to at least address some of these issues. So an end a sustainable end to the conflict is necessary. And for that particular pathway, I think there's a number of things to be done. One, we have a situation now where the military balance is in imbalance, and I think that is going to play out in the next 1 to 2 years if we have the de-escalation roadmap agreed upon very shortly. And the negotiations at the moment, the Saudi visit is historic in a sense that it followed the Saudi-Iranian approach more, in a sense that it's the first public visit, in a sense that, the Saudi negotiations team stayed for almost a week, 6 days. That means substantive talks were held, confidence building, but also building these personal relationships. How these are relating now to the big question, to the intra-Yemeni peace process, it remains far from clear at the moment. And the shape of that, moving forward, we hear ideas of an expanded, political leadership council. We hear ideas of power sharing, but we don't hear much on, military and security arrangements. Where are all of these militias that proliferated and expanded, both in human size, but also arms over the past years will be gone, integrated, dissolved? What form of structures do we have? And I think that is the most significant thing that will play out for any de-escalation roadmap or even a peace agreement in the future.
Okay, let me ask Hussain if you at least agree there, especially on the angles taken in the de-escalation roadmap. There's Hussain, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to mention one thing, that one of the main requests from Saudi Arabia is to be counted as a mediator. They don't want to be counted as a part of this war. And I mean, and if we actually have seen this latest prisoner exchange, we haven't seen a single Iranian prisoners, but we have seen Sudanese soldiers, Saudi soldiers, United Arab Emirates soldiers, and many other soldiers or mercenaries from other countries in the hand of Sana'a. And this is actually a kind of proof about people who say what's happening in Yemen is proxy war. And just let me make it clear that the visit of Saudi delegation to Sana'a about 2 weeks ago, there was a visit 1 month before the agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia with the same delegation to Sana'a. And 2 months before that, there was a high ranking Saudi royal family official who has visited Sana'a 2 months before Iranian agreement with Saudi Arabia. And this show you clearly that the talks with Sana'a was going on, even though Saudi Arabia at that time hasn't got any relation with Iran.
Hussain, I want to take up that point very quickly.
Just one final thing. I mean, for Najeeb Ghanem always to say that.
Yeah, let me just, I need to take that up very quickly before you go too far with Ibrahim, because I saw you laughing, but the point was made that, the soldiers that have been swapped were actually not, they were brought in as what, mercenaries? And it is, to the Houthis, it seems proof that the real proxy war is only being fought by the Saudi-led coalition, because the Iranians are not putting their troops on the ground.
No, did we hear of Hussain Albukhaiti die in Yemen before, just a few years ago? Maybe some recall that. There is a layer of proxy war. We can't deny that. It would be naive to deny a lot of evidence.
Hussain Albukhaiti, he was the ambassador of Iran to Yemen.
Was he a Quds Force commander?
And he died from corona. I mean, what does this have to do with having soldiers on the ground?
No. What was his capacity in specific? He was a specialist with.
Okay, so you just to make the point, you don't agree. This is a proxy war for all powers involved. But still, the conflict does come back to Yemen itself, as we know that this started with the factions in Yemen going to battle. We've only got about a minute left, so Najeeb, I wanted to give you quick final words. We lost you for a minute there, but do tell us, please wrap up your final thoughts.
Yes, really, my final talk that really, although we will be very happy if we can guarantee that there will be an end of this war and guarantee sustainable peace in Yemen. But really, on the ground, all these, Houthis demands and always intimidations and just speaking that very loudly that they are ready for bombarding Saudis and also continuing the war, and our people in Yemen continuing their, suffering. So really, this is not a talk of people who are preparing for peace. Really, always we can guarantee that the Houthi project in Yemen is a project of war, not a project of peace. And as we can see it, all fulfillment, all previous agreements, Stockholm agreements, Hudaydah, and others, just, ignore it and just bypass.
Unfortunately, that doesn't bode well for a peace process going forward. We just have to hope that the negotiators at the table are more skilled and can actually make the difference in negotiations. That's unfortunately all the time we have. I'd really like to thank all three of my panelists so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.